Wind Tides was written by Adrienne Albert in 2008, and it's almost like a little mini concerto for the trombone in one movement. The composer says that the name comes from the obvious reference to the breath or wind that's needed to make sound on the trombone, and from the ebb and flow of the music. The piece is definitely demanding for the trombonists. It has some very high things, some very low things, some extreme dynamics, and there are some endurance things to consider as well. But ultimately, I believe it's rewarding for all of that work that you put into the piece. Because of the endurance demands of this piece, I will often place it progressively later in my practice sessions, which helps me find my limits and build that endurance over time. In the high range, Albert writes a lot of notes that are in second position, B naturals, C sharps, and even high E naturals. And I recommend that you spend a lot of time doing scales, tunes, arpeggios, maybe even bordonis in sharp keys, in tenor clef, or an octave up, to really put yourself in situations where you're having to use those notes in second position because they're not all in the same second position and require a lot of fine tuning. The muted section of the piece presents a unique challenge, and so make sure that you spend time practicing with the mute physically in the instrument and also record yourself, because your perception of what the mute does to the pitch, to the tone, and to the sustain of the notes can be skewed from behind the instrument. The composer herself is an accomplished singer, having worked with people like Igor Stravinsky, Leonard Bernstein, and others. And so I love that she asks us as trombonists also to do a lot of singing in the piece. But many of those singing sections are quite loud. And I can tell you that playing a lyrical line at fortissimo is a very different experience than playing a mezzo piano Bordoni etude. Make sure that you spend time in your practice playing in that singing style at those really loud dynamics. Maybe pull the Bordoni etudes that you normally are playing and really belt them, use vibrato, because it can change some things about how the instrument responds and how the phrases are shaped. The cadenza is quite long and quite extended, and it makes wonderful use of this really interesting technique where the composer asks you to face toward the piano and play into the piano strings. When you're practicing and when you're playing into the piano, make sure that you finish those phrases loudly, assertively, and relatively suddenly in order to get the best sympathetic vibration from the piano strings. If you finish a loud phrase with a gradual taper, you won't get that same reaction from the strings of the piano. Additionally, I advise you not to feel rushed in terms of pacing. When you are waiting in between phrases for those piano strings to make those really cool sounds, it can feel like an eternity for you as the performer, but for your audience, let them soak in those cool sounds before you go on to the next phrase. My final tip is about the ending of this piece after the cadenza, when the only dynamics that are written for the trombone are forte and fortissimo. I have found that when I truly try to play the entire ending full out, it actually ends up anticlimactic. It doesn't really feel like the ending, and it almost becomes too big of an ending. So I encourage you to find a couple of places where you can pull back just a little bit, use a more modest forte, and then really build up to the ending for that big finish. I'm so excited for you to discover this piece, and I hope you enjoy performing Wind Tides.